21 to 26. You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment." But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, "You fool," you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to Christ. Amen. In our text today, Jesus makes life tough in his invitation to live in love. It's easy for us to point out the big things like murder, because that's them. But to see the seeds of murder, the seeds of evil in the small actions we do every day makes life a little bit harder. To see in ourselves the anger and the slander and the disgust that we have with another as we see them as a fool. All of these things come together, and we are told that God's response is like the wrath of old. And so we are asked to stop and reflect. It goes on to say that when you have sinned against another, or at least if another has accused you of sin, you must leave the altar, leave your gifts at the altar, and go and reconcile. Go and explore and confess and rebuild the relationship. So then you can return and we can again meet at the altar. Well, my brothers and sisters have said something against me, so I must leave the altar. My brothers and sisters have said that there is a race issue in our country, and we who are white, especially we who are followers of Jesus Christ, are being called out for our sin. A dear friend of mine, a pastor of color, said to me, "It's great that pastors are passing out water, but they also need to be getting tear gassed." In the 60s, it was the pastors who were leading. And this is why. This is why I have explored my life, and I have come to the painful conclusion that I am a racist. And so I leave the comfort of the altar that I may come and confess. But I also must explore a bit about me. You see, the story that I remember, the story that I'm realizing is not all true, is one where I ignored those things that were racist and embraced and even lifted up those things that set me apart as a friend, as one who was in the fight. I grew up a mile from Columbus, Ohio. We were the suburbs, and just over that line, literally, you stepped into the bad part of town, the inner city, that place of evil, and mainly where the blacks lived. I thought my town had a lot of blacks. I thought I had a lot of black students in my classes. I have memories from sports from a little age of having coaches that were blacks, having teammates that were black, even through high school, seeing pictures of me with friends who were black. Literally, it is not until now, when I went back, to realize how wrong I was, how white we were. As I headed to college, a few hours south of Columbus, near Cincinnati, I'll never forget when I passed a camp for the KKK with 3 burnt crosses on the hill. That next year, the KKK and a bunch of skinheads marched in my college town. Well, I had already thought that I grew up with this openness and this understanding, and I was going to continue to learn and to grow and to take classes and to be equipped and to be given the tools that I needed to not only deal with racism in my own life, but to stand against racism in others' lives, and especially in the church. And I was going to go to that inner city where the black people lived. And I spent my life and my career believing that I got it. Believing that I was doing enough because I kept my hand a little bit near the fire as I would volunteer occasionally. But this summer, as I have explored and wrestled with, I realize just who I am. A racist who needs to confess. Now, if your understanding of racism is one of those extremes who hates people who are a different color, who hates people who look different, who hate people who sound different, whose lives are filled with hate and actions of hate, if that's your understanding of racism, no, you're not a racist, and I'm not a racist. But what I've grown to understand is that's not what racism is. I have knowingly and unknowingly benefited from being white. And I have kept silent when my brothers and sisters needed me to speak, needed me to act. And that is that sin that comes alongside the big ones, and often is worse because we ignore it or we confess it away. So I'm a racist. And I'm going to take a few minutes and share with you why. In my childhood, my parents taught me to love everyone. And through my dad's ministry, I interacted with pastors and other people who were black. And I understood them, although their lives were different and their cultures were different, but they were still children of God. But in my childhood, I also remember the jokes that weren't, appropriate in certain company, but they were still funny. They were still a way to get a laugh in the right group of people. It wasn't coming from the heart, so it wasn't for real. Jokes and snide remarks that weren't so blatant still mentioned to my children, thinking I was funny, thinking I was teaching them and training them to see how it was wrong. A childhood where I could play with a black neighbor and then laugh at them or believe what I was told about them. The stereotypes that I embraced, even though year after year I was educated against them, but yet I wondered deep down inside if just maybe. And now I realize what this systematic racism does, and that this wonderful story that was my family story of coming to America, of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, about accomplishing beyond your imagination, wasn't accomplished by most black people, not because they were lazy, not because of all the stereotypes, but because of a system that I benefited from. And even though I would have my friends that were black, my co-workers that were black, I still looked at a black man and thought he was dangerous or angry, only to come to realize that I am so much more of a threat and so much more dangerous to the black community as one single tall white man than a whole gang from the inner city might be to me. And then my heart is broke as I think about those thoughts that were even fleeting about these men I call brother. It's so easy. I have friends that are black. And that seemed to mean that I knew or were in on a secret. But I got to go one step further. See, I have family members who are black. Back in the 70s, my aunt and uncle adopted a son, and then a daughter, and another son who were black. They were my black cousins in Washington. I was proud of them and often used them as an excuse to know and to be in the know. But yet, I didn't take the time to really get to know. I didn't take the time to want to be in as deep and beautiful relationship with them as I was with some of my other cousins. And I could use distance as an excuse, but what's my excuse today when I'm friends with people around the world? It's so easy to write off so much of my actions and my misunderstandings and my ignorance because of a few friends that I ask tough questions to, or the fact that I have 3 cousins who are black. And yet I have never asked them what that means. I've never prayed for them in all of this mess that we are in. And that's my greatest sin. A sin of silence. As a pastor, I saw what was happening in every community I live in, and I kept silent. I made excuses. I even went as far as writing a paper about how worship can be a place about what we like. And hey, white people like stuff that's different than black people. And maybe it's in missions, maybe it's in Bible study where we do things together. Yet, when was the last time any of my congregations were encouraged to do ministry together with a congregation that was black? Or even more, made the changes in our congregation so that all people might truly feel welcomed. Because you see, you got to understand, it's a rough racket. And I need to keep the peace as a pastor. And I don't want to get too political because we might lose somebody. And this just is not the place for such things. And I get to say that because I'm white. And I've been silent with my family. Both my family that is blood as well as my family that is the church. When people do and say things like I do and say things that are racist, that are wrong. And instead of being willing to risk relationship with them on behalf of those who are a part of my life, on behalf of those who do not have the power that I have or the power that most of my family has and most of my church family has, instead of standing up for those who do not have the power to stand in those places, I kept silent because family first, right? Family always. You just don't talk about it at Thanksgiving. But yet, I kept silent because it was more important to keep the peace. It was way too political. And it wasn't the right place. And I get to say all that because I'm white. And now I get to be a progressive pastor. I get to march for Black Lives Matter down the streets of New Paltz. That's not a risk. That's not stepping up in the way that I need to step up. To my friends this year, I have sent encouraging texts that I was praying for them. And I wrestled with what could I do? But I had to be careful. I didn't want to push it too far. 2 kids in college, don't want to risk my job, don't want to risk things, don't want to risk friendships, don't want to risk relationships. So I try to keep the peace. I try to not be too political. And every place I went seemed to be the wrong place. A privilege I have because I'm white. Today I stand before my Creator, before my church family, And before those brothers and sisters I have abused with my silence and lack of action. And I confess that I am a racist. That I have stood by and watched you and your babies die and have done nothing. I do love you, and I am sorry. Amen.
Create in me a clean heart, O God. Let me be like you in all my ways. Give me your strength, teach me your song. Shelter me in the shadow of your wings. For we are your righteousness. If we die to ourselves and live through your death, and we shall be born again to be blessed in your love. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Let me be like you in all my ways. Give me your strength, teach me your song. Shelter me in the shadow of your wings. For we are your righteousness. If we die to ourselves and live through your death, and we shall be born again to be blessed in your love. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Let me be like you in all my ways. Give me your strength, teach me your song. Shelter me in the shadow of your wings. For we are your righteousness. If we die to ourselves and live through your death, we shall be born again to be blessed in your love. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Let me be like you in all my ways. Give me your strength, teach me your song. Shelter me in the shadow of your wings. For we are your righteousness. If we die to ourselves and live through your death, and we shall be born again to be blessed in